Hello, I'm Jan Shravinsky. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Parental advisory. This episode may contain politically incorrect jokes about windows and tea. You have been warned. There is a reason, though. The latest Kremlin reshuffle drama saw longtime Putin ally Sergei Shoigu relieved of his duties as defense minister. Moreover, another staple of Putin's administration, Nikolai Patrushev, has also been fired, but his destination remains unclear, leading to countless window or tea jokes on social media. In other words, the plot thickens. As in any dictatorship, Putin's maneuvering is not really about accountability or good governance. It's all about money and war, not necessarily in that order. But what will that mean not only for the individuals involved, but also for the Russian war and war crime effort in Ukraine? Here is a brief glance at our main story.
As tensions escalate in Ukraine's northern Kharkiv region, Russian forces continue their advance, with Ukrainian officials acknowledging tactical successes in the ongoing conflict. The outskirts of the town of Vovchansk, once home to 17,000 residents, have become a focal point of intense fighting, with reports of gunfire in industrial areas. Reports indicate that Russian forces have seized several villages in the Kharkiv region, bringing them closer to the city of Kharkiv itself. While Ukrainian forces have managed to hold back Russian troops, there are fears that the conflict could spread to new settlements and eventually endanger Ukraine's second-largest city. Both sides have acknowledged the severity of the situation, with Ukrainian officials stressing that Russia has not yet achieved a significant breakthrough. However, cracks in the morale of Ukrainian troops have begun to emerge, with public criticism of alleged shortcomings in defense preparations. The intensification of military operations around Kharkiv comes amid a broader reshuffle within the Russian military command. President Vladimir Putin recently replaced Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who has held the position since 2012, with Andrei Bolusov, signaling a potential escalation in Russia's war economy and its commitment to a prolonged conflict. Bolusov's appointment comes as a surprise to many observers, given his background in economics. However, analysts suggest that Putin's decision reflects a strategic shift towards integrating military spending more effectively into Russia's overall economy.
And now we're zooming in on the Kremlin cabinet reshuffle mystery. Ready your samovars, this one's gonna be a wild ride. Now, you all probably remember the Prigozhin revolt. Now, this event had the MasterChef mercenaries' fortunes skyrocket briefly, before literally experiencing an Icarus moment on his way from St. Petersburg to Moscow. However, despite all the drama, this event has failed to dislodge the allegedly untouchable Shoigu. So, something must have happened now, which had an even greater impact than that. Shoigu will now become the head of the Russian Security Council, replacing Nikolai Patrushev. It may seem like a classic case of castling, but there seem to be concerns about the potential welfare of some of the chess pieces involved. You see, Patrushev had likewise been considered an essential part of the war machine, having reportedly been one of the architects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, it seems that in dictatorships, untouchable simply doesn't work, and being swept away from the chessboard is an ever-present concern. So why has Putin decided to reinvent his war ministry in the middle of the fight? One reason could be economic. The new broom at the helm, Andrei Belousov, has as much military experience as Shoigu had when getting started, i.e. none. But he's reportedly a seasoned economist. Some experts say Putin may want a finance specialist as defense minister to prepare the country for a long confrontation with Ukraine and even with the West. And if this doesn't sound like the dreaded forever war, a term which armchair critics all across the world always use to chide whatever the White House is doing at any given moment, then I don't know what does. Wasn't it an arms race-induced economic collapse that killed the USSR in the end? Yet the prospect of a successful bean counter at the helm is also a stark warning to the West. If Russia overcomes its economic woes, it may continue to pummel Ukraine for a longer while. And Kyiv's resources are not infinite. It does have a manpower problem, and the current assault in the Kharkiv region does not inspire faith in Ukraine's victory, at least while the resources are still on their way to the battlefield. Now, Moscow may be an economic dwarf compared to the EU and and even the US, but it can still do lots of harm on a limited scale, sending troops riding ancient tanks into the meat grinder by the thousands. Ultimately, whether any Kremlin official accidentally drops 10 floors down after sipping weird-tasting tea near an open window matters little in the greater scheme of things. What does is whether Russia gets its economic act together for a brief window of opportunity, or whether a resilient Ukraine with Western backing will turn this latest scheme into a storm in a teacup. And joining us now to shed more light on the issue is our guest, Dr. Andreas Umland, political scientist from the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So who do you think is in greater danger right now, Mr. Patrushev or Mr. Shoigu?
I don't think they are in danger, but this change of positions is indeed somewhat strange in that Shoigu has lost his post as defense minister, but has in a way risen to a similar or even higher post, that of the secretary of the Security Council, which under Patrushev, who has lost this position, used to be an influential organ, but is now changing its character, perhaps when Shoigu will now take this position.
Do you think that this is really about the personality in question? Patrushev was actually considered to be, something of a man acting behind the scenes, not always visible, but still an architect of the war in Ukraine. So now, him being replaced by Shoigu, do you think this is actually promotion for Shoigu or a demotion? Because there are really conflicting reports about this. Some say it's Shoigu being sidelined. Others say he will be able to continue to exercise some sort of supervision of the ministry while not being the minister. So leaving Mr. Patrushev aside for a moment, where does it leave Mr. Shoigu?
At least he is not out with his with this demotion or promotion, as you want to see it, to the Security Council. He is also maybe too close to Putin to be kicked fully out, as it happened earlier with the Minister of Economic Development. He will play a certain role in this new constellation. What exact role is, however, so far unclear. Sometimes it's, from the outside, actually very difficult to judge what may be the real reasons for this reshuffle behind the scenes, because we know that there are different clans in the Kremlin, and this may be just a balancing of internal clans or camps, and has very little to do with the rational organization of the Russian state apparatus.
So whether this is going to be a fall from grace for any of these two officials remains to be seen. But what about Belarusov? It clearly is rising up in the world, right? At least in the world of the Kremlin autocrat who decided to pick him up and place him at the helm of the defense ministry. So what is his mission going to be? And is he likely to succeed?
The common explanation for that, which is given and has been given now by many commentators, is that Russia is changing towards a war economy, and that's why the defense ministry allegedly needs an economist at its helm. And this is a sign that Russia is preparing for a long war, and it needs somebody with economic experience in the defense ministry. But the issue is here for me not that clear, because before that, Belousov was vice prime minister, so he's now a minister. So in a way, it's actually a demotion for him, you could argue, although he has now a whole ministry for himself. And it's also a ministry that is very bureaucratic, it's over-centralized, and it's unclear yet whether Belousov will actually have the time and the opportunity to change something in the functioning of the ministry and in the running of the war economy when being in such a position, because he will have to do with a lot of daily matters in the functioning of the ministry. And to me, it's not yet quite clear what this actually means. Some even speculate that Belousov could be now being prepared to become a successor of Putin.
That's a dangerous position to be in, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also one of the crucial positions now since the large-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It's certainly perhaps the post now, or one of the posts in the Russian hierarchy of different positions. There are not only ministers, there is the presidential administration, the Security Council, other organs. It's certainly the defense ministry, and the post of the Minister of Defense has now a lot of clout in the Russian hierarchy and system of power. So it makes him certainly a very prominent person. And if he is then evaluated as being successful, perhaps this could be actually a sign that he may be rising further.
Still, being anointed for future leadership may lead to overconfidence, and in Soviet history, overconfidence often was a one-way ticket to the Gulag. In any case, the war economy, now this has taken on something of a mythical meaning, at least when it comes to the way it's being described. But wouldn't you say that a war economy has certain built-in fallacies that a normal economy doesn't have, so it cannot really be as successful? It has its limits, in other words.
Yes, I mean, what is currently happening is that this war economy is actually manipulating the statistics, as I would see it, in that on paper, the performance of the Russian economy as a whole looks good, is actually almost not, at least on the first glance, hampered by the sanctions. But this is, of course, an artificial growth of the economy. It's an artificial performance because this is production for the battlefield. This is has no productive role for Russia itself to play. It's a very unhealthy economy, and it will be perhaps a functioning economy for a certain period, but it will not be performing well for the ordinary Russian citizen. Maybe the appointment of Belousov is an attempt to make this war economy more rational, but as you rightly indicate, this is not possible. I think it's a dead end in the final account. It's Russia is going nowhere with such a war economy. It needs a real economy.
So overall, the problem is that they are manufacturing tanks, planes, missiles. These go to the battlefield, and in many cases, they do not survive. So in the end, the resources are wasted. It's not like you build a school, or you build a bridge, or you build something else that will benefit citizens in the future, right? Could it lead to the same fate as the Soviet Union has faced towards its end, being engaged in a massive arms race, and in the end, the much-vaunted Soviet economy just couldn't make it?
Yes, this is one of the possibilities, but in any way, I think the war is also by itself a threat now for the regime. I don't think that Putin's regime could survive a defeat in this war. Authoritarian regimes can survive defeats in wars, and we have seen that in the past. But this is a war that has now acquired a meaning for the regime and for Putin personally that makes it very difficult for him to survive such a loss. So perhaps for him, for Putin, it's now all or nothing anyway. So he's now going also for this risky path of creating a war economy that will then come back and haunt him at a later stage.
So, of course, a Russian defeat sounds like something we'd all like to see in the headlines, but it's still a long way off. Right now, the Russians are knocking on Kharkiv's door. Do you think they can be successful there? What will this battle mean for the conflict, the battle for Kharkiv?
Kharkiv is certainly an important city. It's the second largest city of Ukraine. It's a former capital also of Soviet Ukraine. This is also the reason why there is the attack on the city now, and the attempt basically to either conquer it or to destroy the city. Ukrainian politicians warning already that this may be a second Mariupol on a much larger scale now with Kharkiv, and one can only hope that the Western support for Ukraine will be such that Ukraine will be able to defend Kharkiv and to let the city survive. This would be otherwise a catastrophe, I think, for Europe if Kharkiv would have the same fate as Mariupol.
And in what way? Would it be a catastrophe in terms of Europe's image, the image of the West generally? If the West stands idle, well, Russians walk in and start genociding a city of over 1.3 million, at least that was the population before the conflict started. How would Europe be able to explain itself? How would America be able to explain itself? By saying, look, we delivered weapons, but at such a critical juncture, we decided not to step in. Some countries said, we're not ruling this out. They didn't specifically name Kharkiv as the trigger. But could it be a trigger for some sort of intervention?
I'm afraid a direct intervention from the West cannot be expected. There's now this talk about perhaps sending Western troops of willing countries to the rear of Ukraine, not to the front line, to the rear, and thereby to free then soldiers who are currently stationed in the rear of Ukraine to go to the front line. But a direct intervention, I'm afraid, is out of the possible now. What is possible are more deliveries of ammunition, of weaponry, of anti-aircraft missiles that can protect cities like Kharkiv. It's one of the larger cities of Europe. It's one of the cultural centers of Europe. In Ukraine, it was the major university town of Ukraine. It had more university students than Kiev, which is a larger city than Kharkiv. And this would be indeed not just a catastrophe for Ukraine, but also a disgrace for the West if this city is destroyed or conquered by Russia.
So one quick question. If this is not a red line, then what is? I mean, Emmanuel Macron has mentioned that he's not ruling out sending troops at some point. And it has to be assumed that any such contingencies are drawn up in the case of some major disaster. So what would that disaster be? An attack on Kiev? I mean, it's just a question of scale now, isn't it? It's the second biggest city of Ukraine. It's the simple fact that it's close to the Russian border, so it's more exposed, i.e. it was more likely to fall. I mean, this explanation sounds not really watertight, does it? For Western leaders, that is.
Yeah, I mean, what I would imagine that the West could be doing justifiably and effectively and quickly is that it announces that it will take care of its own interests on Ukrainian territory. For instance, protecting Kiev because there are Western diplomats in Kiev, protecting the nuclear power plants of Ukraine because their safety is also of vital interest to the rest of Europe, protecting the grain storage and grain transportation lines, the gas storage system that Ukraine has and that many European countries are using. So there are certain interests that the West has on Ukrainian territory, and there would be good grounds to protect these interests with Western troops, with troops from those countries who have this interest, vital interest on Ukrainian territory. This should be the argument and not what Putin says or not so says.
So all this requires leadership. Do we have it? Well, that is a question for another day. For the time being, Dr. Andreas Umland was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thanks for having me.
And now it's time for Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, accompanied by Ukraine's First Lady Olena Zelenska, arrived in Serbia for a rather unexpected visit. This marks the first high-level engagement between the two nations since the onset of the conflict in Ukraine back in 2022.
In Belgrade, Minister Kuleba held discussions with Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić and the newly appointed Prime Minister Milos Vučević. The meeting was rather unexpected, as the Serbian government includes members who are known for their pro-Russian stance, with two ministers currently under US sanctions. A pivotal moment came with the release of a statement from the Serbian Prime Minister's office, affirming Serbia's dedication to respecting international law and territorial integrity of every member state of the United Nations, including Ukraine. The visit by the Ukrainian delegation, which included a tour of Belgrade with Serbia's First Lady Tamara Vučić, drew criticism from Moscow, with Russian state-run media outlets publishing disparaging comments from readers. President Vučić, who has met informally with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky on several occasions, has long professed a neutral foreign policy, positioning Serbia between major global powers. Despite his assertions of steering Serbia towards EU membership, recent developments, including a high-profile visit from Chinese President Xi Jinping and the signing of a comprehensive agreement with China, suggest a tilt towards closer ties with Russia and China.
Georgia is set to adopt a foreign influence bill despite mass protests against the law criticized for mirroring repressive Russian legislation. The bill's opponents have staged near-nightly protests for a month now.
The bill, which mandates any media or civil society group receiving over 20% of their funding from foreign sources to register as agents serving foreign interests, has sparked widespread concern. Critics, including the US State Department, have labeled it a Kremlin-inspired mechanism aimed at stifling independent media and silencing opposition in Georgia, a nation historically caught in the tug of war between Russian and Western influence. Brussels has not minced words, declaring the bill a significant barrier to Georgia's aspirations of joining the European Union's 27-member state bloc. Despite this, the bill forges ahead with what many describe as ruthless determination, a sentiment visually captured by the disturbing scenes of protesters being forcibly subdued and assaulted by riot police.
In the wake of Lithuania's first-round voting, President Gitanas Nausėda has emerged as the front-runner for a second term, with 44% of votes secured. However, with no candidate crossing the 50% threshold, he will face Prime Minister Ingrida Šimonytė in a runoff election later this month.
Throughout the campaign, dominated by concerns over the conflict in Ukraine and apprehensions regarding neighboring Russia, Nausėda has remained steadfast in his commitment to bolstering Lithuania's national security. Addressing reporters post-voting, the 59-year-old former banker reiterated his determination to rally Western allies for increased military support to Ukraine, expressing confidence in his prospects for victory in the upcoming runoff. Šimonytė, the 49-year-old fiscal conservative and the sole female candidate among the 7 contenders, has presented a contrasting vision, advocating for a balance between fiscal responsibility and progressive social policies. The specter of a Russian incursion looms large over Lithuania, with over half of its populace expressing concerns about a potential attack. Such apprehensions are shared across the Baltic region. In response, Nausėda and Šimonytė have both committed to boosting defense spending to at least 3% of Lithuania's GDP, surpassing the anticipated EU average of 2% for 2024.
And it's the end of the line for this episode of Eastern Express. In the meantime, please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.